So there has been a new poll that has just released talking about the primary in New Hampshire and where all the Democratic primary candidates stand. So we're going to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good news is Bernie Sanders now sits at the top of the New Hampshire primary poll. For those of you who do not know, excuse me. Good God, man. Oh, that was my pollo. That actually tasted pretty good. I ain't going to lie. My pollo tropical. If you ever go to Miami, make sure you get some. Anyway, but if you remember, in 2016, Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire handedly, which kind of makes sense. It's actually a pretty libertarian, it's left-leaning, but it's libertarian, but really independent. It's a very independent-minded state, right? So even if you're registered a Democrat, it's highly likely that you lean independent. So he won it handily in 2016. However, there's a lot of mumblings and rumblings going on that maybe this was Biden's time to shine. After this debate, clearly people did not feel as if Biden was actually capable of running this country because he was ahead, but now he's not. So that's a pretty big deal. Other good news. In this poll, Tulsi is actually ranked at 5%. Which is kind of surprising. It's not that surprising because she actually does well in New Hampshire. And from their field numbers, Tulsi's been getting a lot of positive feedback from New Hampshire. But it's also good because of the methodology, right? So the methodology that they used was 250 people for the Democratic primary. Now, they asked 505 people, but of course, only 250 people were asked questions specifically regarding the primary. It's not good, but hey, it's good for Tulsi in this particular case. And here's why. Because we know that these are Democrats. Because we know that this poll, along with a lot of other polls, tend to favor the establishment. Because we know, at least in this particular case, 60% of the people who were questioned in this poll were 50 or older. So that's not a demographic that necessarily favors her because most of her campaigning has been done on social media. That's a big deal. So she still won 5% there. Because we know that with a 6.6% margin of error, which is what this damn poll has, that is not the norm. It is not supposed to be like that. It shouldn't even be taken seriously, to be quite honest with you. But with the 6.6% margin of error and she has 5% of the vote, that means out of those 250 people, a good amount knew her. They tried to limit the amount of people who were asked about the Democratic primary, and people still knew who she was. And they decided that was the candidate for them. Now, that goes, by the way, that's not just for Tulsi. That's for Bernie as well. Bernie was behind in these establishment-leaning polls in New Hampshire, falling behind to Joe Biden most of the time. And now, after they've seen both of them on the debate stage, they made the conscious decision that even though Biden does have the name recognition, and his name is oftentimes attached to Barack Obama, that he is not the candidate for them. So they made the conscious decision to say, Biden is not our guy. Now, Bernie is at 21%. Biden's only at 15%. Elizabeth Warren is creeping up on Biden in New Hampshire at 12%. 11% are uncertain still. So those are votes that could still be won over. Kamala's at 7%. Buttigieg is at 8%. I swear to God, this man will always forever be at 8%. He can't lose any support. He can't gain any support. He's going to be at 7-8% for the rest of his damn career, apparently. It's probably because he's as boring as a rock in mud. Kamala's at 7%, so she's dropped in New Hampshire, which is not good for her. If she doesn't gain some momentum before that first Super Tuesday, where the California Democratic primary, she's not going to get the requisite amount of delegates necessary, which is 15%, to even get any delegates in her camp for that state. Because by far, and this is somebody I've been there. I was at the Democratic National Convention. I spent a lot of time in LA with Pasa and Fiorella, with the Convo Couch, was in San Francisco. I know a lot of people there. They don't feel confident that she can get 15% there right now. And by far, Bernie, Tulsi, and Warren are more popular in California than Kamala Harris is. So that's not good for her. Amy Klobuchar is actually ranked pretty high in this poll for her. She's at 4%. Andrew Yang is at 4%. And for some damn reason, Tom Steyer is at 4%. Being a billionaire, I guess you can buy a lot of polls being a billionaire. Now, of course, this is not going to be a poll that the DNC uses, right? What a surprise. It's probably because they know for a fact Tulsi actually has been picking up steam in New Hampshire. That's why they're not going to use it. And even though this does favor the establishment, which is bad for all the establishment candidates and probably great for the outsiders because they are registering pretty well in this poll, it sucks that they, even with the establishment leaning polls, like you have Tulsi getting 5% and even Andrew Yang getting 4%, but yet it's not going to be counted towards the debate. That's bad. That's not good. Now, here's where things get a little weird, okay? A little weird. So, they asked 505 people total for this entire poll, not for the Democratic primary, right? They asked 505 people. They only asked 250 people any questions regarding the Democratic primary specifically. And then they actually tell you who said they're going to vote in the Democratic primary, who's going to vote in the Republican primary, who won't vote in either, and then none, which is super weird. Because that's, if you're not going to vote in either, I guess you would vote in the Green Party or the Libertarian primary. But why don't you say either primary? Why is either primary and none on there? I don't get that. Unless they mean they're not going to vote in any primary, because that's a whole different thing. That I get. Here's what's interesting about this. 15% said they're going to vote in the Democratic primary. 13% said they're going to vote in the Republican primary. However, a whopping 66% of people supposedly had no response. Like, what primary are you going to vote in? I'm not telling you. Nah. What? Okay, so this is where I'm conflicted. How can we take this poll seriously when they're telling me, in no uncertain terms, that they polled people, these people answered every question from who, favorability between Trump and Nancy Pelosi, which, by the way, Nancy Pelosi is viewed more favorably than Trump. 32% of the people strongly approve of his job performance. Only 19% in this blue primary state support Nancy's performance. So that's not good for the establishment. But they answered those questions, those types of questions. I mean, they even went on to talk about what their ideology is, which way they lean, all that good stuff. But understanding that this is a primary poll, 66% of the people asked didn't give a response, bruh. Do you understand what kind of outlier that is? 15% said they're voting in their Democratic primary. 13% said they're voting in the Republican primary. 3% said they won't vote in either primary. 3% said they won't vote in any primary. 66% of people said they don't have a response. Come on, bruh. And that wouldn't be as weird. That wouldn't be as weird if you didn't go to the breakdown of the demographics of who supported who. And this is good for the Yang gang. You're going to like this news because this poll is probably a whole lie. It's a lie. Because according to this poll, Andrew Yang had 0% of the Asian vote. But Pete Buttigieg got 100% of the Asian vote. Now, I want to be very clear about something. According to the recent breakdown in the donation demographics, Tulsi and Andrew Yang, for obvious reasons, especially for Andrew Yang, have the most donations from the Asian community, bar none, and it is not even close. Nobody comes close to the amount of donations they have from the Asian community. But this is claiming that Pete Buttigieg has 100% of the Asian vote. Now, that would probably mean that, like, maybe one person, maybe one person who was Asian voted in this poll. But the demographic, let me go back down to this, says that 1% of the poll is Asian. So that's about, what, 5 or 6 people? 505 people were asked. There's 5 or 6 people. I doubt that those 5 or 6 Asians were all like, they don't know who Andrew Yang is, didn't want to vote for either Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard. It would be weird to me, considering just that how much Andrew Yang and Tulsi have dominated the Asian demographic thus far, that all 5 or 6 of those Asians went to Pete Buttigieg. It's really weird, not gonna lie. But then, once again, in my humble opinion, it goes back to that big outlier of 66% of people didn't respond to the Democratic primary question. Now, if you don't respond to that particular, if you didn't respond and say, I'm voting in this primary, the Democratic primary, they're not going to ask you Democratic primary questions, which would explain why there's a 6.6 margin of error when it comes to the Democratic primary poll, but only a 4.2% margin of error when it comes to the poll in its totality. So once again, for both, not only for Yang, but for Tulsi as well, this is huge because it seems like the poll is purposely misleading. And even with the poll being as misleading as it is, Andrew Yang gets 4% still. Tulsi Gabbard got 5% still in New Hampshire. That's huge. That is huge for both of those candidates, because clearly something's not right here. Like, can we be honest, right? There's something not right here, and yet the positives overwhelmingly favor the outsider, anti-establishment people rather than the establishment in this particular New Hampshire poll, which means that overall it seemed like the debate has positively affected the anti-establishment people. Once again, more so than it. I mean, the establishment did get kind of destroyed during both debates. Obviously, Bernie did a fantastic job, and then Tulsi just obliterated Kamala, and Andrew Yang had a pretty astounding performance as well. That cannot be denied. Even though he kind of irritated me with some of his foreign policy stances, I'm not gonna lie. But that does not have any. He didn't answer any foreign policy questions, so I can't render judgment about how he did in that department. But on the questions he did answer, his final response, he did a great job. So, yeah, that's the poll. Good news for progressives that even in an establishment poll, we are still seeing some pretty legitimate gains. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button to get all of our notifications if you like that episode of Mikasa Sukasa. You can also help continue to grow our show by donating to our Patreon and helping us hit our goal of 500 patrons. But remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.